let's talk about a word that became very popular: overcapacity. EV sales slowed down a little and boom, everyone becomes a silicon carbide macro strategist. So today, let's take a deep breath, put aside the news and look at what's actually going on. In my last video, we talked about something very impressive: numbers. Millions of wafers, gigantic expansion plans, flyers and brochures that looks very expensive. And this is where I want to introduce something simple, but very important. So first of all, planned production volume is not the same as capacity. Capacity is not the same as actual production. And actual production is not the same as sales. Let that sink in for a minute. These four things get mixed together so often that sometimes I wonder if PowerPoint just auto-combines them. And as I mentioned in the last video, there's also boule yield, wafer yield, equipment uptime, and other operational factors that actually affects what actually comes out of the factory. You can also check out the last video here. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that factories aren't producing. But at the end of the day, planned production and actual demand or sales can be very far from each other. And that's exactly why reading slides isn't enough. Planned volume is what you say at a conference. Capacity is what your factory could do, theoretically, on a very good day. Actual production is what really comes out of the line. And sales, that's when someone actually wires you the money. Give me my money. Thank you. That's like saying you plan to get fit. You own gym shoes, your gym has equipment, but you still haven't gone since January. Just like myself. And here's the part that doesn't show up in the headlines. If you actually go on-site at factories, labs, fabs, workshops, reality looks very different from the brochures and flyers you're reading. Slide says, we will produce 1 million wafers or 10 million wafers. Engineer says, we are still debugging the yield. Marketing says, don't worry, it's all part of the strategic roadmap. And operations says, please don't visit us until next week. And yes, this happens everywhere, but in China, the numbers sometimes comes with a little extra confidence. It's like a carefully choreographed dance between slides, reality, and wishful thinking. Let's move on and talk a little bit about Tiao, something you don't hear in the headlines, and learn what that's actually about. Now, here's something people outside the industry don't talk about. In the Chinese silicon carbide industry, people often used a word called Tiao. And no, it's not just a piece of paper that says Tiao on top, because that will be too convenient. It basically means before you build and ramp a real silicon carbide production line, you need to clear a series of approvals. Project filing, environmental approval, technical validation. Now, let's pause for a second and talk about something that almost never shows up on the slides. In China, you don't just announce a silicon carbide fab and turn it on. No approval, no large-scale production. You can announce capacity, but you can't legally turn it on. And this isn't speculation. If you actually read industry media and official government documents, you will see a very consistent pattern. 8-inch silicon carbide production lines only move forward after completion of a full set of approvals. And that is not just industry talk. Now, this is important. What you're looking at here is an official environmental impact assessment document issued by a local Chinese environmental bureau. Documents like this are not optional. They are part of the mandatory approval pathway. Without completing this process, an 8-inch silicon carbide wafer line cannot legally start construction. And this applies to even companies outside of China. For example, Sanan, a very large company who've moved into silicon carbide space, in their joint venture announcement for new silicon carbide capacity, the wording is very careful. Construction will begin after approval from regulatory authorities. That sentence is doing a lot of work. It means the scale, the process, and the production line itself all require approval. And yes, in industry language, that approval is what we called having the so-called 路条. Now, if you still wonder, think of it like opening a restaurant. You can design the menu, print the logo, post it on LinkedIn, but without the permit, congratulations, you've opened a concept, not a restaurant. So yes, on paper, news, the headlines, you might see 20, 30, or even 50 plus silicon carbide companies planning capacity. But in reality, only a portion of those plans have actually cleared the approval to become a real factory. This is why headlines capacity numbers often look terrifying, until you realize how many of them are still stuck in the PowerPoint. So let's move on to the EV slowdown, the shift to power and energy. Alright, so let's talk about electric vehicles. Yes, EV sales has slowed down, and no, EVs did not disappear overnight. This isn't the end of EVs. It's more like EVs went from growth at all costs to, okay, let's now be adults. And silicon carbide, it's not just sitting around waiting for EVs to come back. We're seeing a clear shift towards power and energy applications, AI data centers, power infrastructures, fast chargers. Even Jensen Huang from NVIDIA said this.
Each year allows us to increase the performance at about the same power by many times. And let me just pick a number, say 5 times or 10 times each year. As a result, our energy efficiency improves by 5 times or 10 times each year. But the problem is this. We're at the beginning of this technology build-out. I'm improving the performance by a factor of 10 times each year, but demand is going up by a factor of 10,000, 1,000,000 times each year.
No.
AI is getting more compute intensive, the adoption's going way up, I've got all these exponentials. And so we're gonna keep chasing this. We're gonna be completely dedicated to advancing the technology as fast as we can. But the bottom line is we need energy.
So as you can see, all that AI needs electricity. And sadly, electricity doesn't run on vibes. It runs on power electronics. And silicon carbide is very good at that. I may have been a little bit slow in the game because recently I discovered something very interesting. Just a couple of weeks ago at a conference in Shenzhen, companies were already showcasing silicon carbide chargers for consumer electronics. This isn't EV traction, this is silicon carbide finding new jobs. So when people say overcapacity, I think we need to be a little bit precise. Yes, plant volumes are high, and yes, prices have come down, but this doesn't necessarily mean chaos. It looks like a market has stopped sprinting and starting pacing itself. On the positive side, we get cheap silicon carbide materials, which help accelerate new innovation. The final section of this video, let's talk about it. So let me answer this question one last time. In my humble opinion, yes, there is an overcapacity in silicon carbide, but maybe that's not an entirely bad thing, because it's exactly this so-called overcapacity that pushes the volumes up, drive prices down, and allows these products to actually reach the market. And when prices comes down, silicon carbide doesn't just stay in the labs or premium products. It finds its way into real life, into EVs, power electronics, into energy infrastructures. And we've all seen what happens when energy becomes scarce. In Europe, energy prices have surged compared to just a few years ago, and we've all felt that impact. Everything costs a little bit more. Electricity costs more, heating costs more, daily life costs more. And for most people, income hasn't grown at the same pace. So if silicon carbide overcapacity helps power system become more efficient, if it helps grid becomes more stable, if it helps energy becomes even a little bit cheaper, I'll be happy. And I know my friends and family in Europe will be happy too. Because that's when technology stops being a buzzword and starts being a benefit. So yes, overcapacity can hurt, but it can also enable, it can accelerate innovation, unlock new applications, and quietly improve our everyday lives. And if that's the direction silicon carbide is heading, then that's the future worth building.